Chapter 10. Provision. Every child is capable of success when the right doors are opened and the right hands guide them through. Mary, the head teacher, stared at the exclusion records laid out before her. Among them was the same name, repeated again and again, Lewis. Lewis was a Year 7 student with additional needs. Bright, inquisitive, and often the one with the sharpest answers in class, he also struggled to regulate his emotions. Minor incidents in lessons quickly escalated. Arguments with peers became confrontations with teachers. Within a single term, Lewis had been suspended 3 times. Each suspension was intended to send a message, but the message Lewis heard was very different. "You don't belong here." His mother sat in Mary's office after the latest suspension, exhausted and tearful. "He's not a bad kid," she said, her voice trembling. "He just can't cope when he feels cornered." "But all these suspensions, they're breaking him." Mary knew she was right. The pattern wasn't a reflection of Lewis's worth. It was a reflection of the school's failure to provide the right support. The sanctions weren't solving anything. In fact, they were widening the gulf between Lewis and the community he desperately needed to feel connected to. That afternoon, Mary gathered her pastoral and SEND teams. "We can't just keep reacting," she told them. "We need a ladder of support that catches students before they fall, not after." Out of that meeting grew a new approach, one where provision was mapped clearly, escalated carefully, and focused on growth rather than exclusion. For Lewis, it became the turning point that changed his story. Why provision is important and how it links to pastoral care. Designing a pathway of support that prevents children from slipping into cycles of failure and disengagement. It recognizes that some students need more than good teaching and high expectations. They need scaffolding, guidance, and sometimes therapeutic intervention to unlock their potential. For students with additional needs, suitable and adaptive provision is not optional. It is the difference between inclusion and exclusion. Without it, small difficulties escalate into major barriers. A missed piece of homework turns into confrontation. A dysregulated moment turns into a suspension. Repeated suspensions, in turn, become a fast track to disengagement, diminished self-worth, and, in some cases, permanent exclusion. Why is provision so important? It interrupts destructive cycles. Instead of punishing the same behavior repeatedly, provision asks, what lies beneath? What support is missing? It makes education equitable. Fairness is not treating every child the same. It is giving each child what they need to thrive. It protects well-being. Students who are constantly sanctioned often internalize the belief that they are bad. Provision helps them see that they are capable and valued. It sustains staff morale. Teachers become frustrated when sanctions don't work. A clear ladder of support reassures them that they are not alone in responding to challenging behavior. It strengthens parental trust. Families want to know that schools see more than just their child's mistakes. Provision reassures them that school is a partner, not a punisher. In pastoral care, provision is the act of building bridges rather than walls. It transforms a school culture from one that excludes to one that redeems. Mary often described it as catching a student in the storm and guiding them back to calmer waters. This is the alchemy of provision, turning repeated failure into renewed possibility, transforming exclusion into belonging, and helping young people see themselves not as problems to be managed, but as individuals with potential to be nurtured. Developing key practices. Mary and her team developed what they called the ladder of escalation and support. It was more than a diagram. It was a living framework that guided staff responses and ensured consistency across the school. At the base of the ladder sat universal provision. This was the foundation: high-quality teaching, structured routines, predictable transitions, and inclusive classrooms. Every student, regardless of need, benefited from these practices. For Lewis, this meant teachers using clear instructions, visual prompts, and calm, consistent expectations. When universal provision was strong, many potential flashpoints never escalated. The next stage was targeted support within the classroom. This was where teachers adapted their approaches for students showing signs of struggle. Lewis's teachers were trained to use de-escalation language, give him short breaks when he became overwhelmed, and build positive recognition into lessons. Instead of singling him out for what went wrong, they noticed and celebrated what he got right. These strategies help prevent confrontations from spiraling out of control. When classroom adjustments weren't enough, Mary ensured that small group interventions were readily available. These programs focused on building skills, social communication groups, literacy boosters, anger management workshops, or resilience training. Lewis was enrolled in a small group session that used role play to explore conflict and self-regulation. For the first time, he began to understand his triggers and practice strategies for handling them. Above this level sat the inclusion and SEND team involvement. Students with recurring challenges were offered mentoring, counseling, and daily check-ins with a trusted adult. Lewis met his mentor each morning, where they reviewed his goals for the day and rehearsed calming strategies. This gave him a predictable point of connection, lowering his anxiety before lessons began. For more complex needs, Mary's ladder included specialist interventions. Educational psychologists, speech and language therapists, CAMS practitioners, and occupational therapists were part of the wider network of provision. These professionals brought expertise that teachers alone could not provide. In Lewis's case, an external psychologist assessment revealed undiagnosed processing difficulties. With that clarity, his provision became more tailored and compassionate. Finally, at the top of the ladder sat bespoke or alternative provision. This was reserved for students whose needs could not be fully met within mainstream structures. For some, it meant a blended timetable with vocational learning. For others, therapeutic programs such as art, music, or equine therapy. The philosophy was clear. If mainstream alone wasn't enough, the school would expand its definition of success rather than shrink the child's opportunities. What made Mary's ladder powerful was not just its structure, but its visibility. Staff could see it, parents could understand it, and students could climb it with dignity. For Lewis, it meant that his suspensions were no longer the end of the story. Each misstep became an opportunity to review, reflect, and escalate support appropriately. Over time, the pattern of exclusion was replaced with a pattern of growth. Sustaining and reflecting. Mary knew that provision couldn't remain static. Needs change, resources shift, and students grow. She built in cycles of reflection where the ladder itself was reviewed and refined. Each term, staff met to examine which rungs of the ladder were most heavily used. Were too many students jumping straight to specialist referrals? Did small group interventions need expansion? Were classroom strategies strong enough at the universal level? Before the ladder, Lewis's school life was a revolving door of suspensions. Each incident deepened his frustration, alienated his teachers, and eroded his sense of belonging. His mother felt helpless, watching her son slip further away from education. Staff felt equally powerless, exhausted by a cycle that seemed impossible to break. After the ladder was introduced, the transformation was striking. Lewis was still the same lively, energetic boy, but now he had scaffolding around him. Teachers knew how to adapt in the classroom. Pastoral staff provided mentoring and counselling. Specialists clarified his underlying needs. Most importantly, his mother saw hope. She could trace his progress step by step, rather than bracing for the next suspension letter. The ripple effect reached beyond Lewis. Other students benefited from the clarity of provision, and staff morale lifted. Instead of feeling like failures when sanctions didn't work, teachers now had a pathway of support to follow. Parents began to trust the school more deeply, knowing their children were seen as individuals rather than statistics. The alchemy was clear. The school had turned exclusion into belonging, despair into direction, and punishment into progress. What once felt like lead now gleamed with the promise of gold. Provision is not about rescuing students after they fall. It is about building a ladder sturdy enough to prevent the fall in the first place. When schools commit to finding the right provision, they do more than meet needs. They unlock futures. 5 reflective questions for this pillar. How clear is our current ladder of support for staff, parents, and students? Could everyone in our community explain the steps and know how to access them? Are we making the most of universal provision, classroom strategies and inclusive routines before escalating to more targeted or specialist interventions? In what ways do we currently involve students and parents in shaping and reviewing provision? How could we strengthen their voice in the process? How consistently do we monitor the impact of interventions? Do we have a clear system for stepping provision up or down based on progress? What values underpin our approach to provision? Clarity, equity, collaboration, flexibility, accountability, and how visible are these in the daily life of our school?